Welcome everybody to our Open Clock Club Christmas special. I've got somebody else joining. Hope you're having a good time out there, and yeah, happy Christmas. Thank you for joining us. I've just lost my thing. Let's go back. Right, so today, can everybody hear me? Yeah? Yeah, it looks like it. Great. So today we are going to have a bit of a fun quiz, and there'll be a prize at the end of it. The prize might be one of our books, I warn you. So if you've already got one, then we'll try and think of something else. Or you could give it away to a friend, or maybe you want to. Once we've gone through the first part of the quiz, then we will take a peek inside one of John Harrison's second series of pendulum clocks, the 1727 regulator, which belongs to Leeds City Museums. Now, this clock it was published, I think, in Antiquarian Horology, but about 5 years ago, I had the privilege of spending 2 or 3 days taking it apart, measuring it, photographing it, and so on. So we'll be able to have a little peek inside and probably some things that other people haven't seen. So that's always nice. So usual housekeeping stuff. We're going to have a couple of short breaks. We'll have the first one immediately after the quiz because we'll know they'll need a bit of sustenance after all that brain energy. And this session is being recorded and it will go on our YouTube channel. So if you want to remain anonymous, then please keep your camera turned off. As always, massive thank you here to our team here, How to Repair Pendulum Clocks team, for doing the live chat. Keep the live chat coming. That's an absolutely essential part of somebody else in the waiting room. Absolutely essential part of this event. I mentioned last week that we're going to start doing some 10-minute talks. You people are going to tell us about yourselves, about your practice, about a particular project that you worked on. And we've already had at least one person sign up for that. So we'll be in touch and probably try and get you lined up for the week after next. You may remember that last week, we had, not last week, first week of the month was Tool Week. So we're going to try and repeat that on the first week of every month because it seemed incredibly popular. I don't know whether any of you people are on the NAWCC forum, but if you are, then there's been a lot of talk this week about bushing, which is kind of an intermediate process, but one that anybody who's getting into clock repair will come across. So we want to kind of dispel some of the myths about bushing, because in my experience, which is of course limited as everybody's experience is, but I've been around for quite a bit, I'd like to kind of share with you some thoughts on bushing and depthing. And in fact, if we get finished today in enough time, we might actually make a little start on that, looking at some of the tools and some of the thoughts. So during the week, you can be thinking about it. Yeah, the NAWCC forum is interesting. It's I'm really enjoying participating and trying to share a bit of knowledge there. So it's good fun. Anyway, if we're all set and we're all comfortable, let's get on with the horological Christmas quiz. And remember, you'll be marking yourselves at the end. So we want fair play, of course. And yeah, let's get on with it. We've got a tiebreaker because in case we get 100% at the end. So here we go with our first question. There are 12 questions in all. Okay, and I'll give you a few seconds to think about them. So question 1, in what century did Charles Dickens write The Christmas Tree, a short story that describes 8-day clocks made from tin for a doll's house? So we're looking for the century there. So anybody who knows anything about literature will know in which century Charles Dickens was operating? And we've got a nice Victorian sort of picture there. So that's question one. Question two, this one's a little bit more tricky, hardcore horology. This clock, which has got a bull work case, which is a marquetry, tortoiseshell and brass marquetry, looks at first view that it was made in France, but it wasn't. And so it was actually made in London, and it was signed by a famous London maker. And kind of one of those things that if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. Like all questions, I guess. But it's signed by a famous London maker. And you can get an idea by looking at the dial more than the case. The dial really gives you a bit of a idea about who made this clock. And basically, if you guess the most famous 19th century London clockmaker or 18th, 19th century, you'll probably get it right. So question three, which English playwright describes clocks as always a repairing, ever out of frame, and never going aright? I was going to do one of my very unfashionable accents then, but that would probably not go down well. So which playwright basically said that clocks were really unreliable? Nothing's changed in several hundred years. That was question three. Question four. This table is often found pasted inside the trunk of long case clocks. In fact, it was used for all clocks and watches, but one of the most regular places we see it today is inside the trunk of long case clocks. So there's this question is in two parts, half a point each for what is the table, what's it called? Obviously it says what it's called at the top in Latin. And the second half of the question is what is the table for, as in how do you use it? So that was question four, I think. Are we all doing all right? Yep, good, good, good. So question five. In which big, it says, York Church can we see this astronomical clock? And remember, if there's we have got a tiebreaker question at the end, but we can always accept extra points for showing off as well in the live quiz. Is the live quiz rolling, Rachel?
Yes. So you need to repeat all the questions at the end. When you get to the end, go back to the beginning.
But what, at the end of the thing or at the end of this? And I will. Yeah, I will. Okay, so oops. So in which York Church? And that's York in England, by the way. Now something's happening to my PowerPoint, it's out of control. So this mechanism is a version of John Harrison's maintaining power. And there's a York link here. Bonus question here is, with a York link, who made this clock? No extra points for that, but just extra kind of kudos. But the question is, what's maintaining power for? It's a really cool clock, by the way, and I can talk about this at a later date if anybody's interested. So John Harrison's maintaining power, what is maintaining power for? I think that was question 5. Oh, sorry, it was question 6. Question 7. Which famous Dutch scientist and mathematician wrote Horologium Oscillatorium, published in 1673? Probably one of the most famous ever horological publications. Which famous Dutch scientist and mathematician wrote Horologicum Oscillatorium? Okay, so far so good. Keep the live chat coming. I suppose the problem with this question is that we all call different parts, the same parts, sorry, different things. And it's easy to say that's not the right name for something. It raises a question that we talk about a lot here. What's the right name for something? And of course, there is no such thing as a right name or a wrong name. It's whatever you call it. However, putting that aside, what's this component called? And as it says there, it forms part of a frame on some earlier clocks, and maybe on later clocks for all I know. But what's it called? Okay, now we're delving into the technical stuff here. How many teeth does this moon disc have? Now you can, if you've never seen one of these before, you can kind of figure it out because there are two moons, and so this disc goes round once every 2 months. How many teeth are on the outside of the disc? Okay. If anybody's brain is melting yet. Question 10, the pain is nearly over. This clock dates from the Second World War. You can see at the bottom of the dial, it was made in 1944. And the colour of the case will give you some idea of its use. It was used on board ships in the Second World War. What was its specific use? In fact, you can get an extra point for what was it called, although extra kudos again for what it was called. But the question is, for what was the clock used? You often see these on internet auction sites, and these things around the edge, by the way, are electrical contacts. Here, the minute hand, you can see the minute hand is cranked. Originally, there would have been a contact on here that touches these outer contacts, making a circuit. And you can see that these contacts are adjustable. They've got little knurled screws on, so you can move them anywhere you want within the 60 minutes. So obviously the hand and the contacts did something that made something happen. But the question is, what was this clock for? I think this is really useful because this is the only one of these clocks I've seen in a long time. The Americans made them, and in the live chat, what's the name of the American people who made the ship's bulkhead clocks? In the live chat, please, I've forgotten. But anyway, and also the British made them like this one. You often see them with those contacts missing anyway, and being converted to normal sort of bulkhead clocks. Right, I hope you got your reading spectacles on. So this is a late 17th century English long case clock. It's got a relatively small dial. It's got bolt and shutter maintaining power. And it might have been, I can't remember, in a marquetry case. But the question is, looking at the seconds dial, and you're going to have to look really closely here, what does the seconds dial tell you about the pendulum, about the period of the pendulum? I'll just give you a few minutes to have a good look. So looking at the seconds dial, what does it tell you about the period of the pendulum? Now, the correct answer here is, I'll give you a clue. It's not a seconds pendulum, although it takes 1 minute to make one revolution, as you can see, because it counts up to 60. It's not a seconds pendulum. So it's a kind of a little bit of a trick question, but have a really good look. Okay. And our last question here is, these two bits of material look like something from a Salvador Dali painting, two objects talking, having a good conversation. But again, it's a two-part question. Half a point for each correct answer. Is what are they actually for, and what are they called? Now, again, always difficult on what these things are called, because no doubt I call them something different from everybody else. So we'll have to have a little bit of fun and flexibility on that. So the question is, what are these objects? They're inside a clock. Hopefully that's quite obvious. And what are they called? they often get beaten up. You can see one of these here is a bit beaten up, but for various reasons, people bend them, which always ends in disaster. So anyway, so there we go. Okay, we all happy there? Got our answers? You've got about half an hour to do all your Googling and stuff like that. So it's 6:15. We're going to take a 2-minute break or so, just for a quick comfort break. We'll meet back here at 6:18, and we'll have a good old nosy round this Harrison clock. You can see the picture here of it in bits. And I'll do a bit of a kind of historic introduction. Now, this isn't my specialist field. I'm not an historian, so a lot of what I repeat might be mildly sort of, it's a long time ago as well since I've worked with these clocks and making excuses. But what we can do is we can have a good look at the kind of technical side of things. So let's meet back in a couple of minutes. Thank you. And keep the live chat coming. Right. I've been asked very quickly to run through the questions again. Before I do that, somebody said, was the clock by Hamilton or Liberty ships? I actually think it was by Chelsea. I think it was Chelsea that made the other clocks of that type. And somebody said the two components look like the cover of Division Bell by Pink Floyd or Easter Island Figures. Brilliant, thank you for that. And let's run through the question. The question one was, in what century did Charles Dickens write The Christmas Tree? Question two, who was this clock by? Clue there, if you don't know, it wasn't a French maker, and although it was made in London, it wasn't a London family. Three, which playwright describes clocks as always being broken, basically? Number four, what is this table for? What is it and what is it for? Number five, in which church is this clock in York, England? Number six, this is a version of John Harrison's Maintaining Power. What does Maintaining Power do? Number seven, which famous Dutch scientist and mathematician wrote Horologium Oscillatorium? What's this component called? How many teeth are on the outside of this moon disk? What was the purpose of this clock that has got electrical contacts on the dial? Looking at the seconds dial of this clock, what does it tell you about the period of the pendulum? Wolfie's looking very cool there. I think he's got all these questions. He's looking very confident. And lastly, what are these components for, and what are they called? Okay. So the Harrison clock. Very briefly, I got to know this clock when I was in self-employment. I worked kind of in the north of England for heritage organisations, museums, and people like that. And this clock was at Leeds City Council collections. You'll see in a minute in their reserve collection. And the one of the conservators there, called Ian Fraser, did a really brilliant job in getting the clock back on display. And as part of that process, I took some time and had a really good look at the mechanism of the clock. So some of you, most of you probably know a lot more about the story of John Harrison than I do. But of course, John Harrison was the person that effectively showed the way to the solution of the longitude problem by using a timekeeper. Now, of course, it's not quite as simple as that, much more to the story. But this clock is one of the second series of long case clocks that Harrison made. The first series were basically just long case clocks, but made out of wood. Harrison was a carpenter, so he made nicely, beautifully made, but kind of regular long case clocks in the second decade of the 18th century. I think they were 13, 15, and 17, if I remember rightly, but I say quite a long time ago. And then there was a Longitude Prize, the famous Longitude Prize, which no doubt you've seen the film, you've bought the T-shirt, you've read Dava Sobel's book, and so on. And the Longitude Prize, I think it was 1714, wasn't it? Kind of changed everything because it was the, at least this country's first government-funded research project. And Harrison lived at Barton-on-Humber, which is just opposite the river of the big maritime city of Hull. So he would have heard about the Longitude Prize, and he started to apply himself to the three problems that face clockmakers if you want to solve the problem of longitude by timekeeper or in conjunction with astronomical observations anyway. And those three problems basically are: one, the lubrication. That is, if you take regular oil, which the best quality oil at this time was out of a whale, and you sail to the West Indies, which we did a lot back in those days, by the time you get there, the oil is going to be gone off or thickened, or basically caused a problem with the timekeeping the clock. So what Harrison did, he kind of thought out of the box, and he said, I'll make a clock that runs without oil, I guess. The second problem was temperature compensation. Now, this clock doesn't have its original pendulum. We think that when Harrison sold this clock, he either kept or removed the pendulum to kind of protect his patent and his sort of IP, if you like. So this clock just has a regular sort of iron rod pendulum, I think, from what I remember. And the third issue, which wasn't resolved in these clocks, was the one of actually using a pendulum at sea, which our great scientific friend Christian Huygens had tried and failed, as had many others like Henry Sully and all those people. Now, Harrison wasn't proposing this clock for sea. Of course, he made the three large timekeepers, which we know now as H1, 2, and 3. But he was certainly resolving those other two issues here. And he claimed stability of a second in 100 days for these clocks. And if you follow kind of research and what's going on in the horological world, you'll know that was a clock by Martin Burgess recently at the Royal Observatory Greenwich, which has been widely publicized, which actually kept time to well within that second in 100 days, which is pretty amazing. So here we have the clock. On the left, it's in a black painted case, what you might call Japan. And on the right is a reproduction movement, which was made by somebody called Len Salzer. And that clock does have a reproduction gridiron pendulum. So when I first came across the clock in this, this looks a strange photograph, but it was, oh, Rian's entered the waiting room. Hi, Rian, welcome. You've come in on the best slide. So Leeds City museums, like a lot of museums, have a multi-function kind of space. They've got a purpose-built space called the Discovery Centre, which has got special air conditioning and storage and security for a whole lot of different objects. Now, when I first saw this clock, we just placed it here. This wasn't the storage space for the clock, by the way. We just placed it here, but as you can see, it's surrounded by a whole lot of crazy objects, including scooters, animals, you name it, it's in here, basically the story of Leeds. And what you see straight away is the clock is made out of wood. Again, really interesting. And when I was preparing this, believe it or not, I did actually prepare this. I thought you guys, you know, people in America are probably going to be far more familiar with wooden clocks than I am. I don't really see that many here. Some German, you know, European wooden clocks, but this is really the only wooden clock I've ever sort of worked on. So that's a wooden dial. It's all made out of wood, basically. So let's dive inside. So when we get the movement out, this is pretty much all so-called original. The 24, is that right? 24-hour wheel? Yeah, the date wheel down here, that 24-hour wheel is a replacement. But most of the other stuff is, I mean, I use it very, very advisedly, but original. Just an interesting point here, many interesting points, is this component here is part of the maintaining power. We talked about bolt and shutter, bolt and shutter, as I used to joke with my students. And when we come to look at the back of the dial, we can see actually that Harrison has made kind of a duh mistake when he was making the dial, which is sort of good fun. So the frame is oak. You've got the seconds bowl here, just as you'd have on a regular 8-day duration long case clock. And that's what this thing is, really. It's a regular kind of long case clock, but very beautifully made out of oak. So we've got those members. Now, remember, this was experimental. So in fact, I'm just going to go back and point out these latches. Can you see the mouse on the screen?
Yes.
All right, these latches here. So the frame was kind of quick release. And presumably this was because Harrison was making lots and lots of different alterations as he went along. Now, I don't actually show many good pictures of the escapement here. It has the Harrison's famous Grasshopper Escapement, which he developed for the clock at Brocklesby Park, a turret clock, because of the problems with lubrication he was having with that clock. Now, the escape wheel in this clock is, we believe, original, or again, slightly cautious in the use of that word, but the actual escapement, the Grasshopper pallets themselves are later. This clock was at one stage fitted with an anchor recoil escapement. And we've got a question: is the oak frame heavy? Not in particular. I mean, I'm relatively used to working with brass clocks, and it's just such a freak show, frankly, to work on this clock. And you sat there, and you think, this is one of the world's most important scientific instruments, but it's made out of this really kind of unfamiliar material. So no, it's not. It's very demountable, and the wheels are incredibly they feel light to a clockmaker that's used to working in brass. So the actual pallets are later. It was converted to anchor recoil escapement, I think, for most of its life. But there we have on the left, we have the regular kind of striking levers that you would find on any count wheel striking clock. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say, this is the second series of clocks. There were 3, we believe, that were made in the 1720s. This one, I think, is 1727. So we've got the striking work here on our left. Here we've got anti-friction rollers for the escape wheel, and here we've got the Grasshopper pallets. This device here is for the maintaining power. And you can see a little lead tab, which is part of a kind of counterpoise system. So here's the frame with all the junk taken out of it. And, you know, I'm not a wood maker, but it's, I've spoke to people who are, and it's kind of very beautifully made, but people expect, Harrison was a wood guy, to have used super quality materials for this. And it's beautifully made, but when we look at some of the pieces of wood, he appears to have used what was there. He knew about quick growing wood and slow growing wood and the different properties, and Lignum Vt, of course, which we'll come on to in a few minutes. But for the things like the frame, because he realized, which a lot of people don't, and it takes a lot of thinking about, is that really the clock movement, and I've got to be careful what I say here, very, very broadly speaking, before the internet explodes, is basically an engine for driving the pendulum. If you, and I'm quoting my old boss here, so apologies, is that if you've got a choice between a good quality pendulum and oscillator, you can kind of keep giving it a shove every now and again, and your clock will keep relatively good time. You can have the best frame with the best train and the best escapement on the planet, but if you've got a ropey oscillator, the clock ain't ever going to keep time. And Harrison knew this, which is why he put so much energy into developing the gridiron pendulum, the cycloidal cheeks, the amplitude of the pendulum that compensated not only for temperature, but also for barometric pressure compensation as well. So that's why I believe we see some interesting bits of wood in the frame here. You can say on the live chat if I'm speaking with my usual total rubbish, or if any of you in fact are carpenters, I'd love to hear what you think about this choice of materials. So what we've got here are three-way mortise and tenon joints. So that's kind of, I presume, quite a cool thing to do. This is what they used to try and teach us at school, and believe me, my joints never looked anything like this. So in theory, although the frame I think is glued with animal glue, it's kind of demountable, which is really useful again if you want to make any alterations. So they're yeah, I say three-way mortise and tenon joints. And you can see as well here, look, the mortise gauge scribing out marks. And without getting on my conservation soapbox too much, because it's Christmas, so I should back off a bit, this is why conservators tend not to refinish clock components when they're cleaning them. They'll do everything they can to keep this evidence, because the evidence is critically important to understanding the object. And there's another thing. Rubbish or Congreve. Oh yeah. Yeah, Wolfie has just said the worst oscillator ever, Congreve's rolling ball clock. In another week I'll tell you about them. Maybe we can exchange stories there. But again, I'm showing off, I'm afraid, as always, is that I worked on Congreve's own Congreve, the original one at Woolwich Arsenal, and I spent a long time trying to get that thing to keep time, and of course it doesn't. So here we have the beautiful Harrison joints. So looking at the uprights, probably the first thing you'll notice are these bushes here, which are Lignum Vt. So for people who are not clocks or wood people, Lignum Vt is a naturally waxy or resinous tropical hardwood that Harrison would have known about because it was used in the pulley blocks of for ropes and pulleys on ships, which, as I say, he lived like a stone's throw or so from the river. So we've got Lignum Vt, and we'll see that more in the clock as we go along. But you can see here that if you were like making the best clock ever, you might, we'll see in a, you might choose better or straighter bits of wood. So here's one of Harrison's Lignum Vt bearings, and of course this was his answer to the oiling problem. Just don't use added lubrication. Have brass bearings running in Lignum Vt bushes or bearings, and you do away with oil, and therefore you get around the problem of contamination, the oil thickening, and so on and so forth. Now, the problem with this was when it got through to H4, he couldn't miniaturize these bearings or get them to work properly. So he did, in fact, of course, revert to jeweled bearings, and famously the diamond verge pallets, which is going to be one of my questions, but I forgot. So here we see this piece of wood here, which kind of looks like he sort of just picked it up from a pile of old scrap. A very interesting kind of piece of material to use, but he realized that it wasn't particularly important. As long as the great wheel was kind of in the right place, then it didn't make a whole lot of difference. So moving up to the top of the frame, this is, there's been quite a few alterations up here, so I have to be a bit careful about what I say. But what we've got here, this piece of glass that you're looking sideways at, is the bed for the knife edge for the Grasshopper Escapement. For the pallet arbor, we're used to most pallet arbors having round pivots on the end. If you've ever been involved with those sort of late 18th, early 19th century French regulators of the golden period, French horology, a lot of those have knife edge suspensions as well, what we call inverted knife edges often. So that's what this piece of glass is for here anyway. It's the knife edge bearing for the Grasshopper pallet arbor. Oh, slightly in the wrong order. So the dial, like a pretty standard early 17th century, 18th century, sorry, Dora, dial in this kind of naive, japanned sort of style. And you can see here that it's actually signed James Harrison, not John Harrison. In this earlier period, James and John were in partnership together. And it appears that James never made, when John Harrison went to London, was it in the 30s, James never made that move. So then we lose James out of the story of the Longitude Prize. You can see Barrow here, which is a little village near Kingston upon Hull. And in the live chat, quick as you like, what's this slot for here? First one, come on. That was the first one, Rachel, with the answer to that. What's that slot for there? Back of the dial. Do you remember earlier when I was talking about the maintaining power shutter that comes over the winding square? The point of that for non-clocky people is that you can't wind the clock because there's something in the way of the winding aperture until you've cocked the maintaining power. Maintaining power, yeah, Wolfie is straight up there, well done. It's for the maintaining power where you go like that before you wind the clock. And this was the kind of mistake you can see on this side of the dial. Harrison has started to cut out the back of the dial for the maintaining power shutter, and then gone, it's on the wrong side, and then started to do it on this side. So that bit has never been used. So that's quite good fun. One plate of wood here, again, you know, you might think that this, I think it's quarter sawn oak, a lot of this would distort, but it hasn't. And I'll just go back. I never noticed that before. I must have noticed it, but there's a cutout here as well that isn't used. Just go back. Yeah, cool. Right, so the date ring is signed James Harrison, and it's dated here, Barrow. And the paper, we believe, well, must be original, so very cautious about looking after that. It was removed, I think, cleaned and re-glued by a paper conservator, but really lovely to see that original material there, which again, on my conservation soapbox, and I better hurry up here, that when we deal with clocks, of course, we often need to employ conservators of other of other disciplines. Again, another quick quiz for hopefully somebody else will jump in there first before Wolfie gets there. But what are these little cutouts in the back for of the date ring? I'll give you a few minutes. If I don't get to it, I can come back to the answer for that. And here's the seconds bowl, and the same thing here, look, with a hole made in the seconds bowl for the same reason. Again, this beautiful 18th century paper. Ian Fraser, who's the conservator at Leeds, there was a question on about depthing on these clocks, on wooden clocks, basically. And of course, I don't work on wooden clocks, but you guys in America said, well, the problem with depthing on wooden clocks is that the wheels shrink across the cross grain, so you don't have equal sort of meshing of wheels. And Harrison got around this by making the teeth of the wheels out of section of oak that are all slotted in, like, I don't know if you've got them in the States, but here we've got a thing called a Dairy Lee cheese, which is like wedges of triangles the whole way around. So this was a little experiment to show how the wheels are made. Anybody come up with a reason for their holes? The reason for all those holes are counterpoises or a balancing. And you can see here on the minute wheel, this is the little pin for releasing the striking. And this piece of lead that's riveted on is the counterpoise for the minute hand. Harrison knew that with timekeeping, with an anchor recoil escapement and the Grasshopper Escapement, I think even more, you've got, without getting too bonkers technical, positive escapement error. So if you drive the clock more, the clock runs faster. So when the hands are going downhill under the like 3:15, the clock will gain a little bit, and when it's going in the direction, it will lose a bit. If you ever get one of those microset timers or a timing app on a regular clock with a anchor recoil escapement, you can plot that losing and gaining effect of the hands. So here's the cannon wheel, and it's a cock with two tapered boxwood, sorry, I don't know what's happened to the thing, two tapered boxwood steady pins, which are even now 200 and whatever it is, 300 years on, are still incredibly tight in their hole, so nice and stable. Sorry, yeah, that was the minute wheel. It's the cannon wheel, sorry, not the minute wheel, my mistake. Here's the center wheel, and we've got more Lignum Vt here, so brass bearings running in Lignum Vt arbors, but also Lignum Vt trundles. I know Dave L, who's with us today, had a problem with his trundles on his clock, the wire ones that you find on mantle clocks. Well, John Harrison was using them, but making them out of Lignum Vt. So you're in very, very good company. And here's a nice little close-up. And you can see here, without getting too distracted by reamers, you can see here how, of course, he made things tapered, like all 18th century clockmakers do. And you can look at the barreling on these trundles. They're actually very, somebody was saying, is the frame light? The thing that strikes you is how rattly everything is. You think this is never going to work until it's got some power on, then it all seems to kind of come together. But when it's loose, it sort of feels like a bag of spanners. So there's the escape wheel, which I think is original, I think, works both with anchor recoil and Grasshopper Escapement, which is a kind of a form of sprung anchor recoil, I suppose. And you may know that Harrison was involved in designing new escapement profiles for anchor recoil as well. There's a famous drawing that he did, which was for a turret clock, I seem to remember in the back of my mind. So different kinds of oak. He knew the difference between the denser and the lighter wood, the fast growing and the slow growing wood. And here's a barrel winding arbor, and you can see that the ratchet is the ratchet wheel is just cut straight into the end of the arbor, so it's very kind of straightforward in its way. Nice little boxwood click. And you know, and even this was a sort of practical proposition, little bits of ringing, sort of nice decoration that any sort of wood turner would put on the wood to make it look attractive as well as being functional. And again, you can see the difference in materials between the core of the great wheel here, the bearing surface, and the body of the wheel itself. So a massive amount of thought has gone into it in relation to materials. Let's just flick through this. Yeah, this is the minute wheel, and you can see here he's used a solid pinion, but this time made out of boxwood. So that's rather sweet to see that as well. This is what you would call the pinwheel on a count wheel striking clock. So it's these rollers that you can see in the kind of second layer here that lift the hammer lifting piece to make the hammer strike the bell. Oh, good view here, sorry. Also, those sections, look, that he let in. There's a section starting there with 1, 2, 3, 4 teeth. So every fourth tooth, there's a new piece of wood let in, so the grain is running radially. So it's kind of plywood, I suppose, as well. Here's I think this is the count wheel following detent. If I'm, oh yeah, this runs on the cam. So this is the count wheel detent. And then the fly, which again is really cool because it's made out of wood. I think that's so sweet. Just very thin little bits of oak. How are we doing on the live chat, Rachel? Yeah, any more questions?
Yeah.
And then weirdly, I don't know whether this is the original bell or whether it's later. Now, Harrison was very interested in bells. He wrote his own scale for music and he was interested in bell founding, and I'm going off my specialism here, but I think, or I remember that they were actually involved in bell casting as well. Somebody might be able to put me right on that. But of course, what we've got here is just a really regular bell, and the shape that you would find on a 30-hour 18th century long case, not an 8-day clock. So whether it's later or not, I don't know, but it's kind of quite interesting to see. I think we've got another question here. And I think last but not least, here is the hammer, a question. Oh, boxwood, and what was the what size was the fly? Okay, cool. So I've got 2 questions there. Properties of boxwood for clockmaking from Jane, really useful material. We use it a lot now as a polishing kind of lap to hold polishes, but the most common use of boxwood is a thing called the boxwood chuck. If you ever want to make a very precision sort of component for holding another component, watchmakers use boxwood because it's got very tight, fine grain, a bit like fruit wood, like apple or pear. So boxwood is an incredibly useful material to have hanging about. So Harrison would have used it on that pinion because it had very tight grain, and unlike things like ebony, it's not too brittle as far as I understand, but you'll find boxwood hanging around quite a lot. So here's the hammer with again boxwood here that he could shape, and the size of the fly, I'll try and dig out the measurements I've got for it, but it was I would say about 1.5 inches long, something like that. And then the winding key, which is total work of art in its own right. Again, boxwood handle and shaft here with a brass ferrule to prevent it from splitting. This is all screwed together and demountable. So again, a real sort of privilege to be able to handle this and measure it and so on. So there we go. We're going to have a couple of minutes break and we'll be back at 51, I think. Yeah. Let's just have a couple of minutes for a comfort break and let's come back and we'll sort out the Christmas quiz. So welcome back, and let's whiz through the quiz. So you're marking yourselves, so no cheating, otherwise Santa will know. So are you all ready with your pens and paper? Okay, so which century did Charles Dickens write The Christmas Tree? It was the 19th century, I think. Yeah, got our literary expert nodding here. So 19th century. Question number 2, Volamy, the Volamy family. Anybody get that right for this clock? Wolfie got it right, well done there. Question 3, which English playwright describes clocks as always going wrong? It was, of course, Shakespeare, and in Love's Labour's Lost, Act 3, Scene 1, 1597. So 16, 17, 18, 19. So 400 years of clockmaking and we still haven't got them right. This chart or table is called an equation of time table. So we'll take variations on that theme. And it was used, remember, half a point each of these. So it's equation of time. And what it is, it's used when you need to set your clock because you find time from a sundial and because the actual length of days according to sundial are uneven and a clock runs at even mean time, there's a difference between what the sundial says and what the clock says, and this table is a cross-reference table for that. 4 times a year there isn't a difference, the sun and the clock agree, but it's an equation of time table for setting your clock from a sundial. This clock, which was a memorial to RAF members of the Royal Air Force, is in York Minster. So York Minster is the correct answer for that. Extra bonus point for which other famous clockmakers got a clock in York Minster? Anybody know? There we go. So what's the point of John Harrison's maintaining power, or maintaining power? Well, the point of maintaining power is that it keeps the clock running when it's been wound. Not on a normal, like a regular long case or tall case clock, there's friction between the great wheel and the barrel. So when you wind the clock, the train actually runs backwards, which can A, disturb timekeeping, but B, it can also damage the escapement. So posher clocks tend to have a form of maintaining power, and this is Harrison's. The bonus point on that one was the clock is made by Cook of York, co-famous instrument makers. The Dutch scientist that wrote Horologium was, of course, Christian Huygens, or Huygens, depending on how you pronounce him. So give yourself a point there. Oh, there we are, have him in fact. This component is called a latch here in the UK. I think if you put anything down there, that counts as a point because who knows what it's actually called. But it's on kind of regular clocks, you tend to have a tapered pin that goes through a hole in the pillar to hold the frame together. On this clock, which is by Frohman Teal, dated about 1660, it had 8 latched pillars, can you believe it or not? So it's called a latch. The moon disc has 118 teeth on its edge because I'll get this right, Reed. There are 2 moon phases and the moon phase is approximated to 29.5 days. But of course, you can't have a half a tooth. So rather than the disc being indexed once every day, every 24 hours, it's indexed twice a day to give you 59 teeth. And then you've got 2 moon phases on the disc, which gives you 118 altogether. So a bit of 118 was the correct answer. This clock is known as a Zig Zag or Convoy Clock, and it was used for zigzagging. So it was used for U-boat torpedo avoidance in the North Atlantic convoys, and maybe others, I don't know. Ships would set a certain path according to a chart, and they, rather than sailing in a straight line, as it were, they would sail in a zigzag, which I think was actually quite successful at avoiding U-boat attacks. So a zigzag or convoy clock. And this one, if you didn't get this, I don't blame you because it's quite tricky. But if you look at the number of marks between 5-second interval, there are 4 marks, not 5, which indicates that the pendulum, did you get this, Dave? Dave L? Oh. Was a 1 1/4. So actually not quite such an unusual thing for late 17th century clocks, but not many of us have seen those things. So the answer there is the period of pendulum is 1 1/4 seconds. And these badges are fusee stop irons. They're from a fusee driven clock, and they limit the amount of winding that the clock can do. We were talking, I think, about mainsprings. So what happens is the line between the barrel and the fusee rubs on this bit, and this moves across, and then the fusee cone horn jams against this part here. So they're fusee stop irons. Is the answer there. Right, so here's the thing, Rich, are you ready? Are you ready with the thing? Did anybody get 12 points? No? Nobody with 12 points? No? 11? 10? We've got one with 10. 9? 8? Way, well done, Jeremy. 7? 6? 5? Did anybody not get any points? Surely everybody got 1 point. Sure you did. Well, well done, everybody. So it looks like we've only got one person with 10 points. Is that right? And that's Wolfie. So well done, Wolfie. If you get in touch, have we got Wolfie's details?
You can send us a direct message.
All right. If you send us a direct message with your address, we will put your prize in the post. So I hope you've all enjoyed that, people. By the way, this was going to be the tiebreaker, which we don't need, which was what are components A, B, C, and D. We can come back to those at another time. So remember that next week is Tool Week, and we'll be giving away, I won't tell you what it is, because again, you might be able to find out, but we'll be giving away this thing here, little stick of material, which is used in new making for clocks, traditional clockmaking tool. Quite difficult to find now, but this is going to be the prize for next week. Now, I'm very aware that this week hasn't been particularly beginner friendly, so apologies to everybody there. It's been a bit of a clocky fest, really, but it is Christmas. So next week, we're going to be going more back to basics. We're going to be talking about tools, particularly bushing and depthing, but please get in touch through social media or our website or in the live chat here, and we can answer most questions you want. I've gotten out my boxwood collection, which we'll talk about a little bit more next week as well, how you use boxwood and stuff like that. So thank you very much for joining us. Wishing you all the remainder of a happy Christmas and happy New Year, of course. And please join us again next week and spread the word for Open Clock Club and Tool Week. Thanks very much, and bye for now. Thank you.